Hello, and welcome back to The Power of Now, a guide to spiritual enlightenment with Gilda and Barbara. Today, we're doing a book study on A New Earth, Awakening to Your Life's Purpose, written by Eckhart Tolle, and we hope you have your copy so that you can follow along. Today, we are on Chapter 10, Section 3, A New Earth, Awakening, and the Return Movement. My name is Barbara Wainwright, and I'm here with Gilda Simonet. Welcome, Gilda.
Thank you. The return movement in a person's life. The weakening or dissolution of form, whether through old age, illness, disability, loss, or some kind of personal tragedy, carries great potential for spiritual awakening. The disidentification of consciousness from form. Since there is very little spiritual truth in our contemporary culture, not many people recognize this as an opportunity. And so when it happens to them, or to someone close to them, they think that there is something dreadfully wrong, something that should not be happening.
There is in our civilization a great deal of ignorance about the human condition. And the more spiritually ignorant you are, the more you suffer. For many people, particularly in the West, death is no more than an abstract concept. And so they have no idea what happens to the human form when it approaches dissolution. Most decrepit and old people are shut away in nursing homes. Dead bodies, which in some older cultures are on open display for all to see, are hidden away. Try to see a dead body, and you will find that it is virtually illegal, except if the deceased is a close family member. In funeral homes, they even apply makeup to the face. You are only allowed to see a sanitized version of death.
Since death is only an abstract concept to them, most people are totally unprepared for the dissolution of form that awaits them. When it approaches, there is shock, incomprehension, despair, and great fear. Nothing makes sense anymore, because all the meaning and purpose that life had for them was associated with accumulating, succeeding, building, protecting, and sense gratification. It was associated with the outward movement and identification with form. That is to say, ego. Most people cannot conceive of any meaning when their life, their world, is being demolished. And yet, potentially, there is even deeper meaning here than in the outward movement.
It is precisely through the onset of old age, through loss or personal tragedy, that the spiritual dimension would traditionally come into people's lives. This is to say, their inner purpose would emerge only as their outer purpose collapsed, and the shell of the ego would begin to crack open. Such events represent the beginning of the return movement toward the dissolution of form. In most ancient cultures, there must have been an intuitive understanding of this process, which is why old people were respected and revered. They were the repositories of wisdom and provided the dimension of depth without which no civilization can survive for long. In our civilization, which is totally identified with the outer and ignorant of the inner dimension of spirit, the word old has mainly negative connotations. It equals useless, and so we regard it as almost an insult to refer to someone as old. To avoid the word, we use euphemisms such as elderly and senior. The First Nations grandmother is a figure of great dignity. Today's granny is at best cute. Why is old considered useless? Because in old age, the emphasis shifts from doing to being. And our civilization, which is lost in doing, knows nothing of being. It asks, being? What do you do with it?
In some people, the outward movement of growth and expansion gets severely disrupted by a seemingly premature onset of the return movement, the dissolving of form. In some cases, it is a temporary disruption. In others, a permanent one. We believe that a young child should not have to face death. But the fact is that some children do have to face the death of one or both parents through illness or accident, or even the possibility of their own death. Some children are born with disabilities that severely restrict the natural expansion of their lives. Or some severe limitation comes into a person's life at a relatively young age.
The disruption of outward movement at a time when it is not meant to be happening can also potentially bring forth an early spiritual awakening in a person. Ultimately, nothing happens that is not meant to happen, which is to say, nothing happens that is not part of the greater whole and its purpose. Thus, destruction or disruption of outer purpose can lead to finding your inner purpose and subsequently the arising of a deep outer purpose that is aligned with the inner. Children who have suffered greatly often grow into young adults who are mature beyond their years.
What is lost on the level of form is gained on the level of essence. In the traditional figure of the blind seer or the wounded healer of ancient cultures and legend, some great loss or disability on the level of form has become an opening into spirit. When you have had a direct experience of the unstable nature of all forms, you will likely never overvalue form again, and thus lose yourself by blindly pursuing it or attaching yourself to it.
The opportunity that the dissolution of form, and in particular old age, represents is only just beginning to be recognized in our contemporary culture. In the majority of people, that opportunity is still tragically missed because the ego identifies with the return movement just as it identified with the outward movement. This results in a hardening of the egoic shell, a contraction rather than an opening. The diminished ego then spends the rest of its days whining or complaining, trapped in fear or anger, self-pity, guilt, blame, or other negative mental emotional states, or avoidance strategies such as attachment to memories and thinking and talking about the past.
When the ego is no longer identified with the return movement in a person's life, old age or approaching death becomes what is meant to be, an opening into the realm of spirit. I have met old people who were living embodiments of this process. They had become radiant. Their weakening forms had become transparent to the light of consciousness.
On the new earth, old age will be universally recognized and highly valued as a time for the flowering of consciousness. For those who are still lost in the outer circumstances of their lives, it will be a time of a late homecoming when they awaken to their inner purpose. For many others, it will represent an intensification and a culmination of the awakening process.
I really like this section because I feel like awakening is when you suddenly realize that like you don't have to live in autopilot anymore. You know, like you become aware and like present more yourself. And I feel like the return movement is like bringing that new awareness back into your everyday life. Like you're still doing all the same things, like when you go to work, you know, like the relationships you have, like your daily routines. But now instead of like being on autopilot all the time, like you do them with more clarity instead. So it's like when I'm, going to the bathroom, like I wash my hands, I'm not just like daydreaming and thinking about all these things. Like I'm actually like feeling my hands, like the water, the warm water touching my hands and like the soap and, just kind of like massaging my hands with the soap and just really feeling it. It's like I'm living in the moment with that and like washing my hands with clarity, I guess, instead of just kind of being on autopilot and getting it over with. I don't know, that's just kind of what this section reminded me of. It's like you have a choice to like live on autopilot, or you have a choice to live with more clarity, which I guess would be the awakening. And I almost feel like awakening is realizing like you're not stuck in those old patterns. You become more present and more aware. Whereas like the return movement is bringing that awareness back into your daily life. It's like you're living the same life, but like with more clarity, more calm, like you're living more intentionally, if you will. But yeah, I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
I agree with everything you just said. And it would be wonderful if more people were in touch with that inner life and were more conscious in everything that they were doing throughout the day. It would be a new earth. Like he says, we would be living in a new earth where more people would be in tune with the natural flow of the universe and energy, the way that things unfold and how we are all in this together. I think it's very interesting that he pointed out in this section about the older people being disregarded. They put them in homes and things like that. Let somebody else take care of them. I guess sometimes I get it when it becomes when you're responsible for raising a family and then all of a sudden you get the responsibility of being a caregiver for someone that is in a baby state, meaning they can't take care of themselves. Maybe they can't even feed themselves. In that case, it can be so cumbersome that you can't live that double life, a caregiver and a parent and a provider and all the rest of it. So I understand how sometimes that might be necessary. However, I have personally always loved having conversations with people that are older than me because of the wisdom. There's so much wisdom there. Like he said that in this section. In other cultures, older people are revered because they have so much wisdom. And in our culture, being old has a negative connotation that goes with it. Why is old considered useless? In this day and age, it's because so many people are still in the business of doing instead of being. So it is a shift. It is a shift in consciousness to recognize that expansion and contraction, like he talked about in the previous section, where we are born and our life expands and we grow and we go and we do a lot, we accomplish a lot, we make things happen. And then the contraction begins and we start to recognize and be more. We get to the point where we see the value in sitting and doing nothing except being present for another person. When we can sit and be present for another person, it is a huge gift that we give them. It's healing, it's acknowledging, and you don't have to say anything, as Eckhart frequently does. He just brings his presence to a situation and change happens, transformation happens. And I could understand, thinking back in my youth, how many things I wanted to do. I never had the idea that I just want to sit and be. That never occurred to me. I was busy doing. So I understand how a younger generation would also be consumed with the doing rather than the being. And at the same time, there's so much value and wisdom that the older generation has that we can learn from, and spending time with people that are older than us. And it doesn't necessarily have to be, what did he say, senior. Spending time with somebody who's older than us can be of great value, and they don't necessarily need to be a senior to make them older than us, depending on your age. I'm going to say this: I have met some young people that are also very wise, and I've had children teach me things that are amazing and change my life. So I guess that said, you can find value most likely wherever you look for it. I think the thing for us all to be conscious of is being present, recognizing when we're having an ego-based thought. Anytime there's judgment, that's ego. Complaining about something is also ego. Because when you're present and conscious, you recognize that everything is happening for a reason. You might not like it. It's still happening for you. Maybe it's for your growth. Maybe it's for your spiritual growth.
I like this part in the book where he says, when you have had direct experience of the unstable nature of all forms, you will likely never overvalue form again, and thus lose yourself by blindly pursuing it or attaching yourself to it. I don't know, because I just kind of look at my life and some of like the experiences I've had, like within like the past 5 years, because my spiritual awakening started probably about 5 years ago. And I feel like I've had like direct experience of the unstable nature of all forms. And it really did kind of teach me not to overvalue form again, and like lose myself in it because I was so attached. And I like how he talks about the diminished ego, then spends the rest of his days whining or complaining, trapped in fear or anger, self-pity, guilt, blame, or other negative mental emotional states or avoidance strategies, such as attachment to memories and thinking, or talking about the past. And I like that because that's really what happens. Like,
Well, yeah, and that's what happens to unconscious people, right? If they're conscious and aware of presence and understand that, hey, nobody gets out of here alive. This is a temporary experience. If they're conscious and they're aware, there's a gratitude and a gratefulness for everything that has occurred, even the aging process, because there's so many gifts along the way. And there's a gratitude for those things, unless they're unconscious. And then they can't do anymore. And because they can't do and they aren't ready to be because they aren't awake, they get frustrated. They get pissed off, literally frustrated with their life situation and that they can't do anymore. And that's when they get bitter. And like he says, they have fear and anger and self pity and guilt and blame other people for their situation. But that all comes from the egoic mind. That all comes from ego. And if you are blessed enough to be awake, then you will be grateful and in gratitude for everything that has happened in your life that has helped you to be awake in this moment. Congratulations. It's a miracle. You are a miracle. Your life is a miracle. All of our lives, it's a miracle that we are here, that we're all living, breathing beings here. So take a moment and get into a place, a state of gratitude. Be grateful for every experience that you've had that has helped you to be the person that you are being right now. Hope you have a great week ahead. Bye now.
bye.
If you've enjoyed this podcast and you'd like to go deeper into a spiritual conversation, you can join our Facebook group, The Power of Now, A Guide to Spiritual Enlightenment with Gilda and Barbara. Or you can contribute by going to wainwrightglobal.com/go/support.